Hello, everybody, and welcome to Meet a Scientist, sponsored by New Mexico EPSCoR. I'm your host, Anthony Salvano from Explora Science Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Today we have Dr. Matt Lakin, who is an assistant professor in the computer science department and affiliated with the Center of Biomedical Engineering at the University of New Mexico. Thanks for joining us today, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at UNM.
Sure. As you said, I'm a professor in computer science, and I have a number of interests that are sort of unusual, I guess, for computer scientists. So I'm also very interested in biology, and so the main focus of my research is on essentially designing and building biological and biomolecular systems. That is to say, things like cells or molecules that can carry out some kind of computation. And so the interest in things like sensing and information processing, which allows us to address questions like how do living systems monitor their environment, respond to changes in their environment, maybe even learn from their experience to enable them to better adapt and survive. And so we do that by a sort of combination of computational work, simulating, running simulations, and also wet lab work. So I run a wet lab in which we try and design and build molecules and engineered organisms to test some of these ideas.
That sounds really fascinating. You mentioned biomolecules for computation, and most people, I think, wouldn't associate, the molecules inside your body as being able to compute anything. So how does that, play out in your research?
I think it's a great question. I think it's kind of become, I guess, pretty much accepted over the last sort of several decades that, in fact, a key component of cells and life in general is processing information. So, from cells in the body to single cell organisms that need to adapt and survive in a potentially changing environment, they need to somehow sense that environment, make decisions, autonomously based on what they see, and then act on those. My sort of particular interest is the part in the middle, the decision making, which is kind of the same thing that goes on inside a computer. Right? Computers make decisions in a sense based on your input to the computer, and that might be as simple as, well, what to display on the screen, for example. And a similar processes are going on in your cells, and then therefore they are being carried out by some kind of biological molecule. So the question is, what kind of molecules, and how are they going about doing that? And also, how can we harness that for our own purposes, right? For practical applications. So how can we, for example, engineer cells to do the things we want them to do? For example, to synthesize chemicals that are of interest to us, pharmaceuticals, biofuels, and so on. Or how can we engineer, smart diagnostics or therapeutics that are able to, interface with the body in some way to determine whether or sample from the body to determine, does one have some kind of disease, and if so, what is it?
So if you had to kind of boil it all down to one thing, what would you find most interesting or important about your research?
I think the thing that I find the most interesting is the connections between the different fields. So in my case, it's sort of computer science and I guess the biosciences and bioengineering. And I think that's also quite an important point as well, that obviously in sort of these days in science, there's a lot of progress being made in individual fields, but there's also a huge amount of opportunity at the kind of the interfaces between fields, right, where ideas from different fields can kind of combine with each other or be applied in new areas where they weren't previously. And the interface between computer science and biology is one of the one of the most promising at the moment, especially given some of the current challenges we're facing in biomedicine today.
So I guess, talking about your career and what interests you, what's something that, like, basically, how did you get from, young Matt to, being an assistant professor here at the University of New Mexico?
I guess maybe by a slightly circuitous route. So I guess, I was an undergraduate initially, I guess, in the natural sciences, supposedly physics, and from there, I sort of found my way to computer science fairly early on, and I got my undergraduate degree there, did my PhD in that as well, and then after that, I got a position at Microsoft Research. So I was there for 2 years in the Microsoft Research Lab, and that's kind of how I got interested in this whole idea of sort of biology and applying computer science to biology. And the group that I worked with there essentially developed software tools for modeling, right? So for trying to run simulations of biological systems and also sort of engineered versions, so both the natural biology and sort of the synthetic biology, and so that kind of got me interested via this sort of programming in the idea of nanotechnology, biotechnology, and then after that, I moved to New Mexico. So I've been at UNM now for I guess almost 9 years in various guises. I was a postdoctoral researcher for a number of years and a research faculty member, and then I sort of joined the main faculty and assistant professor in 2017. So sort of 3 years. So that's kind of the path.
Yeah, when you said that you were interested in physical science and then you went to computer science, but you did that kind of early. Was that in your college years, or were you starting to make that transition in high school?
As an undergraduate, yeah. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I guess back in the day, computer science in college was, in high school, sorry, was even less of a thing than it is now, right? I mean, I had sort of picked up some programming myself, so I had some idea what was going on when I started, studying computer science. So I was at a bit of an advantage compared to some in terms of making that transition. But yeah, that was never really sort of part of the plan, to the extent that there ever was a plan, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good experience. I know, back in the day, as you say, the only computing code programs that I could participate in was just word processing.
Yeah.
So if there's anything that you could offer to your 10-year-old self, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think in hindsight, I guess I would say to sort of keep an open mind about what you might be interested in sort of later in life, because, my own sort of path has been sort of meandering, and I've found myself coming back to things that I, maybe discounted at an earlier stage. I was very much sort of focused on physics initially and sort of drifted away from that over the years. And so, I think that's definitely an important thing to, I think to keep an open mind and to keep a sort of a broad perspective on what you find interesting and what you may want to do. And I think having interest in what you're doing is very important. Obviously, if you don't find it interesting, it's going to be very hard to persevere at it for a long period of time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I only have one last question for you. Are you laying the groundwork to build a bio machine that will fight the robots when they eventually uprise and take over the planet?
I don't know. I guess at this stage, probably we're trying to build the robots, I guess. Um, I mean, I think we're sort of, everything that we build can be used sort of for, in many different ways, right? And so that's one of the sort of ethical issues is, well, is this a good thing to be doing, and how could it be used? And the biosciences currently are, very much on the front line of defense, I guess, against maybe not the robots, but disease. And yeah, everything that helps us understand better how these systems work, and perhaps most importantly how to control them, can definitely play a practical role in making the world better.
Well, thank you for your time today. Is there any last thing that you want to plug before we go?
Well, I guess you can check out my group's website. I can send you the link, Anthony. And I guess consider computer science and or biosciences as a career, because they're definitely both, I think, going to be very good prospects for the future.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was great having
Thanks.
you here today.